The Ottoman Empire lasted 600 years, conquered 3 continents, and made Europe tremble. Impressive resume. But behind all that glory, absolute insanity. We are talking sultans who drowned hundreds of women because one might have cheated, a legal requirement to strangle your own brothers, soldiers who declared war on the government by flipping soup, and a guy who banned chemistry because he failed at reading. These are 33 facts about the Ottoman Empire that sound fake but are painfully, hilariously real. 1. In the Ottoman Empire, even your execution could come with a sporting chance. Emphasis on chance. If you were a high-ranking official condemned to death, you had one final option: outrun the chief gardener in a foot race through the palace gardens. Win, and you got exile instead of execution. Lose, and you got the silk strangling cord waiting at the finish line. Now, the chief gardener was not some elderly guy trimming roses. This was a professional executioner who happened to have gardener in his job title, probably because chief strangler looked bad on the palace org chart. And these gardens were massive, designed specifically to give the condemned a sliver of hope while providing cardio entertainment for the court. Most runners lost. The smart ones probably wished they had spent less time on politics and more time on leg day. 2. In 1633, a man named Lagari Hasan Celebi strapped himself to a wooden seat, packed it with about 50 kilograms of gunpowder, and launched himself into the sky over the Bosphorus to celebrate the birth of the Sultan's daughter. Witnesses described him soaring roughly 300 meters into the air before deploying what can only be described as proto-wings and gliding safely into the sea. When he swam to shore, he reportedly told Sultan Murad the Fourth, "Your Majesty, Jesus sends his greetings from the sky." Instead of being executed for this borderline blasphemous joke, the Sultan laughed, gave him a bag of gold, and made him a cavalry officer. So apparently in 17th century Istanbul, strapping yourself to a homemade rocket and making religious jokes was a valid career advancement strategy. 3. Sultan Murad the Fourth did not just dislike coffee. He despised it with the burning passion of a man who probably needed some caffeine himself. In the 1630s, he banned coffee, tobacco, and alcohol across the entire empire, but Murad was not the type to trust enforcement to others. He would disguise himself as a commoner at night, patrol the streets of Istanbul personally, and if he caught anyone sipping from a suspicious cup, he would pull out his sword and behead them on the spot. No trial, no appeal, just decapitation by royal barista police. Historians estimate he executed over 20,000 people during his reign, many for substance violations. The man was basically running a one-sultan vice squad with a 100% fatality rate for offenders. 4. Sultan Abdul Hamid the Second ruled the Ottoman Empire in its twilight years, and he ruled it with extreme paranoia and an extremely large nose. This nose became such a sensitive topic that Abdul Hamid banned the word nose from newspapers, textbooks, and official documents. Biology classes had to teach facial anatomy while awkwardly dancing around that central feature. Geography books could not mention the nose of a peninsula. Even medical texts had to find creative alternatives. Journalists learned to write entire articles about faces without mentioning the thing in the middle. The censors worked overtime, making sure no printed material in the empire could remind the Sultan that his schnoz was, shall we say, architecturally significant. Imagine controlling a crumbling empire and your biggest concern is nasal vocabulary. 5. When Mehmed II conquered Constantinople in 1453, he decided the Ottoman succession needed some clarity. His solution was the law of fratricide, which legally required every new sultan to execute all of his brothers upon taking the throne. The official reasoning was preventing civil war over succession. The unofficial reasoning was that Ottoman princes really should not have been born with ambitions. This was not some occasional practice. It was codified, expected, and carried out with silk cords because royal blood could not be spilled. Mehmed III alone had 19 brothers strangled on the day of his coronation in 1595. 19. In one day. Family reunions in the Ottoman dynasty were less awkward small talk and more who survives until dessert. 6. The Janissaries were the elite military corps of the Ottoman Empire, feared across 3 continents. But when they got angry at the Sultan, they did not write petitions or organize protests. They flipped their soup cauldrons. These massive bronze kettles were sacred symbols of Janissary unity, used for communal meals that bonded the troops together. When the cauldrons were upright and full, everything was fine. When the Janissaries tipped them over in the courtyard, it was an official declaration that the Sultan had lost their support. And losing Janissary support usually meant losing your throne, your head, or both. Multiple sultans were overthrown following the ominous sound of soup hitting the ground. Imagine explaining to a foreign ambassador that your government just collapsed because soldiers were unhappy with their lunch situation. 7. Sultan Ibrahim I, who ruled from 1640 to 1648, earned the nickname Ibrahim the Mad, for reasons that become obvious very quickly. He was obsessed with fur, not wearing fur, not trading fur, but covering everything in fur. He lined the walls of his palace chambers with sable and lynx pelts. He reportedly tried to dress his cats in tiny fur coats, which is either adorable or deeply concerning depending on your perspective. His fur expenditure nearly bankrupted the treasury. Officials would present him with the softest, rarest furs from across the empire just to keep him calm. When your sultan's main hobby is interior decorating with animal pelts, while the empire faces military threats on multiple fronts, you know the administration has some challenges ahead. 8. Ottoman hospitality was serious business, and wealthy families developed elaborate rituals to demonstrate generosity. One of the strangest was diskirasi, literally translated as tooth rent. When guests finished a meal at a rich household, the host would pay them money as compensation for the wear and tear their teeth suffered while chewing the food. This was not charity. This was a flex. The richer you were, the more you paid your guests for the privilege of eating your expensive cuisine. Guests were essentially being reimbursed for the dental labor of consuming your lamb and pilaf. Refusing the payment was rude. Accepting too eagerly was also rude. The whole system was a complex social dance where everyone pretended that teeth depreciation was a genuine economic concern requiring financial compensation. 9. Ottoman soldiers developed a slapping technique so devastating it had its own name, the Osmanli Tokat, or Ottoman slap. This was not your average face tap. Warriors trained specifically to deliver open palm strikes with enough force to reportedly kill a man or knock a horse unconscious. The technique involved the entire body, rotating from the hips with the arm loose until the moment of impact. According to Ottoman military accounts, possibly exaggerated but possibly not, a properly executed Osmanli Tokat could shatter jawbones, rupture eardrums, and end fights before swords were even drawn. Whether these claims were accurate or just intimidation propaganda, the reputation alone was valuable. Enemies facing Ottoman troops had to worry not just about their weapons, but also about getting slapped into the afterlife by some guy's bare hand. 10. Abdul Hamid II returns to our list with another paranoia-driven ban. When electrical dynamos were being imported to modernize the empire, Abdul Hamid prohibited them entirely. Why? Because he misread the word dynamo as dynamite and became convinced people were trying to smuggle explosives. His advisors apparently tried to explain that dynamos generate electricity while dynamite causes explosions, but the Sultan was not interested in physics lessons. The ban stayed. So while European cities were lighting up with electric power, Istanbul remained in the dark because the Sultan could not be bothered to consult a dictionary. The empire that once terrified the Western world was now being held back because one man confused a generator with a bomb. 11. After the law of fratricide became too bloody even for Ottoman standards, they invented an alternative, the kafes, or the cage. Instead of killing princes, they locked them in windowless palace apartments for their entire lives until one of them was needed as sultan. Some princes spent 40 years in the kafes, seeing no one except guards, deaf servants, and occasionally sterile concubines. The idea was to keep them alive but politically neutralized. The result was that when these men finally emerged to rule, they were often psychologically destroyed, paranoid, incompetent, or completely detached from reality. So the empire traded immediate fratricide for slowly manufactured insanity. Murad the Fourth emerged from the kafes and became a brutal tyrant. Others emerged barely functional. Great succession planning, everyone. 12. The early 18th century brought the Tulip-era to the Ottoman Empire, a period of peace and cultural flourishing that was also completely economically deranged. Wealthy Ottomans became obsessed with tulip bulbs, paying fortunes for rare varieties while the empire's finances crumbled. But the truly absurd part was the entertainment. Elites would gather at night in gardens illuminated by candles strapped to the shells of tortoises, who would wander slowly through the flower beds, creating a moving light show. Meanwhile, they held tortoise races, betting enormous sums on which shell-bearing reptile would cross a finish line first. The peasants were starving, the military was underfunded, and the aristocracy was watching turtles with candles crawl through overpriced flowers. The era ended with a violent rebellion, shocking absolutely no one. 13. During the siege of Constantinople in 1453, the Byzantines blocked the Golden Horn harbor with a massive chain to prevent Ottoman ships from entering. Most commanders would have considered this an obstacle. Mehmed II considered it a minor inconvenience. In one night, he had his men construct a greased wooden roadway over the hills of Galata and physically dragged approximately 70 warships overland, dropping them into the harbor behind the chain. 70 full-sized warships, pulled by hand and ox over a hill. In one night, the Byzantines woke up to find an entire enemy fleet inside their protected harbor. This was not military strategy. This was the 15th century equivalent of flipping the game board because you did not like the rules. 14. Selim II earned the nickname Selim the Sot because the man loved wine more than he loved governing. Historians debate whether he conquered Cyprus in 1570, primarily because the island produced excellent wine and he wanted a reliable supply. Whether or not that was the actual motivation, it certainly fits his character. Selim reportedly spent more time in the palace cellars than in council meetings. His death in 1574 was appropriately on-brand. He slipped on wet marble floors in the palace bathhouse while drunk and cracked his skull. Some accounts say he was chasing a bottle that rolled away. An empire spanning 3 continents, and its sultan died because he could not hold his liquor or his footing. At least he was consistent. 15. The Ottoman Empire had dress codes that would make any homeowners association jealous. Specific colors and styles of clothing were legally mandated based on your religion. Muslims wore yellow shoes, Christians wore black, Jews wore blue, Greeks wore specific colors, Armenians wore others. Getting this wrong was not a fashion faux pas, it was a criminal offense. Wearing the wrong colored slippers could land you in prison or worse. Inspectors actually patrolled markets and streets checking footwear compliance. Imagine explaining to your family that you are being arrested because your shoes were insufficiently color-coordinated with your faith. The empire had real problems, actual threats on its borders, but somehow authorities found time to police sandal pigmentation with bureaucratic enthusiasm. 16. Around 1630, Hazarfen Ahmed Celebi strapped on a pair of artificial wings and launched himself from the top of Galata Tower in Istanbul. He glided across the Bosphorus Strait and landed safely on the Asian side, covering roughly 3.5 kilometers on homemade wings centuries before the Wright brothers were born. Sultan Murad the Fourth watched this historic achievement, rewarded Celebi with a pouch of gold coins, and then immediately exiled him to Algeria. The reasoning: a man capable of flying was simply too dangerous to keep around. He might spy on the harem from above, or cause other unspecified aerial mischief. So the first successful human flight in recorded history was rewarded with money and permanent banishment. Ottoman innovation policy in a nutshell. 17. The Ottoman court operated under a strict rule of silence in the Sultan's presence. Nobody spoke unless directly addressed, and even then, responses were minimal. This created a problem. How do you run an empire when talking is forbidden? The solution was an elaborate sign language that became mandatory for all court officials, servants, and guards. Deaf individuals were actively recruited for palace positions because they were already fluent in nonverbal communication. These deaf servants became some of the most trusted and highly paid staff members because they literally could not overhear secrets. The silent court continued for centuries, with entire political intrigues, conspiracies, and daily administration conducted through hand gestures while the sultan sat in terrifying quietude. 18. Abdul Hamid the Second, our champion of paranoid prohibitions, also banned the import of dynamo machines for generating electricity. His reasoning was simple and simply wrong. He thought dynamo was another word for dynamite. Despite advisors attempting to explain that one produces power while the other produces explosions, the Sultan refused to accept this distinction. The ban remained in effect, and the Ottoman Empire fell behind in electrical infrastructure because its ruler could not differentiate between vocabulary words. While European capitals installed electric lighting, Ottoman cities stayed dim. Modernization efforts were literally short-circuited by one man's inability to use context clues. When your empire's technological progress depends on the Sultan passing a basic vocabulary test, you have systemic governance issues. 19. Sultan Ibrahim the Mad had many peculiarities, but his preference in women was particularly specific. He was attracted exclusively to extremely heavy women and sent agents across the empire to find the largest woman available. They eventually located a woman reportedly weighing over 150 kilograms, possibly of Armenian origin, whom Ibrahim nicknamed Şeker Pare, meaning piece of sugar. She became one of his favorite concubines and wielded significant political influence at court. Ibrahim showered her with gifts, titles, and land grants. His agents continued searching for similarly sized women to add to his collection. Whatever your thoughts on body positivity, you have to admit that Ibrahim was committed to his type, even if that commitment involved imperial search parties. 20. The Janissaries were fearsome warriors, but their fashion choices were questionable. Their ceremonial headgear, called the birk, was an enormously tall felt hat that could add over half a meter to a soldier's height. These hats were symbols of pride and tradition, but they were also wildly impractical. Janissaries regularly got stuck in doorways. They could not take cover effectively in battle. Enemy archers had oversized targets. The hats made stealth operations impossible. But suggesting a hat redesign was basically treason because the headgear represented centuries of Janissary identity. So the empire's most elite fighting force continued marching into battle, wearing what were essentially felt towers on their heads, tradition trumping tactical common sense as it so often did. 21. When the printing press revolutionized Europe in the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire took a look and said, "No thank you." Printing in Arabic script was banned for nearly 300 years, until 1727. The official reasons involved religious concerns about reproducing sacred texts mechanically and protecting the jobs of scribes and calligraphers. The unofficial result was that while European literacy and knowledge production exploded, Ottoman education remained limited to hand-copied manuscripts affordable only to the wealthy. When printing was finally allowed, it came with heavy restrictions. The empire that once led the world in scholarship deliberately handicapped itself for 3 centuries because movable type seemed suspicious. Sometimes civilizations declined due to invasions or disasters. Sometimes they just banned books. 22. Sultan Ibrahim the Mad allegedly committed one of history's most horrific acts of jealousy. According to accounts of varying reliability, he became convinced that one of his nearly 300 harem concubines had been unfaithful. Unable or unwilling to determine which one, Ibrahim reportedly ordered all of them, possibly 280 women, tied into weighted sacks and drowned in the Bosphorus. Only one woman supposedly survived, rescued by a passing ship. Historians debate whether this mass drowning actually occurred at this scale, or was exaggerated by later chroniclers trying to justify Ibrahim's eventual overthrow. Either way, the story was considered plausible enough by contemporaries to circulate widely, which tells you everything about his reputation. 23. The Ottoman palace had many specialized departments, but few were as dedicated as the imperial sherbet service. Sherbet, a sweet fruit drink, was the Sultan's beverage of choice, and it required fresh snow to prepare properly. An entire bureaucratic division existed solely to transport snow from distant mountains to Istanbul, maintaining ice houses along the route and delivering frozen cargo to the palace kitchens year-round. Hundreds of workers were employed in the snow logistics chain. Elaborate protocols governed sherbet preparation for different occasions. The Sultan had specific flavor preferences that had to be memorized. While the empire faced budget crises, military defeats, and territorial losses, the snow delivery system remained fully funded. Priorities. 24. The Medar military band was the Ottoman Empire's psychological warfare division disguised as musicians. Their sound was deliberately chaotic, combining massive drums, shrieking zurna pipes, cymbals, and bells into a wall of noise designed to terrify enemies before combat even began. European armies reported that the Medar's approach was more demoralizing than actual battle because the unrelenting rhythmic assault destroyed concentration and morale. The music never stopped during engagement, creating a sonic environment of constant chaos. Some historians consider the Medar the world's first military marching band. Others consider them the world's first heavy metal group. Mozart and Beethoven both composed pieces inspired by Turkish military music after hearing the Medar's reputation. Warfare through weaponized sound. 25. Ibrahim the Mad returns to our list because his behavior really was that consistently bizarre. Among his many eccentricities, Ibrahim enjoyed throwing gold coins into the Bosphorus Strait and watching the fish react. Not feeding fish with bread like a normal person, throwing actual money. He would stand on the shore or a boat and hurl gold pieces into the water just to observe whether fish would attempt to eat them. Spoiler, fish do not eat metal currency, but Ibrahim kept trying, apparently hoping for different results. Meanwhile, his treasury officials watched literal gold sink to the bottom of the sea while they tried to figure out how to pay the army. The fish remained unimpressed and uncooperative throughout his reign. 26. The Ottoman Empire entered World War I through what might be history's most awkward diplomatic incident. Two German warships, the Goeben and the Breslau, were fleeing British pursuit in the Mediterranean. They sought refuge in Ottoman waters, and to avoid international law complications, the Ottomans purchased them and renamed them with Turkish names. The ships kept their German crews. These German sailors, now technically Ottoman naval personnel, then bombarded Russian ports in the Black Sea. The Russians declared war. The Ottomans were suddenly in World War I, allied with Germany, through a series of events that their own government had not fully authorized. The Sultan and his cabinet were essentially dragged into a world war by naval officers who jumped the gun, literally. 27. For centuries, Ottoman protocol dictated that the Sultan must dine alone. No matter how powerful your position, no matter how close your relationship to the ruler, you could not share a meal with him. The Sultan ate in solitary splendor while servants watched silently. His mother, his wives, his children, his grand vizier, absolutely no one sat at his table. This isolation extended to most aspects of his life, creating rulers who were physically surrounded by hundreds of people but emotionally and socially alone. Some historians argue this enforced solitude contributed to the mental instability many sultans displayed. Hard to develop normal social skills when every meal since birth has been a solo activity watched by mute attendants. 28. The Janissaries, the Ottoman Empire's most fearsome Islamic warriors, belonged primarily to the Bektashi Sufi order. This particular religious order had some notably relaxed interpretations of Islamic law, including tolerance for wine consumption. So the elite military force of the world's most powerful Muslim empire was officially affiliated with a religious movement that conveniently permitted alcohol. Janissaries could drink wine and claim religious cover for doing so. This theological loophole was so well established that Bektashi lodges essentially functioned as Janissary social clubs with religious justification. When you need your soldiers to be devout enough to fight holy wars but relaxed enough to enjoy themselves, creative religious interpretation becomes a military necessity. 29. Clock towers were controversial in the Ottoman Empire for longer than you might expect. Public timekeeping devices faced opposition because, traditionally, prayer times were determined by the sun's position and announced by muezzins from minarets. Mechanical clocks represented Western influence and implied that human-made machines could replace divinely ordained natural timekeeping. Some religious authorities argued that clock towers were essentially bid'ah, forbidden innovation. Major cities went without public clocks for decades, while European visitors found the absence baffling. Eventually, modernizing sultans installed clock towers anyway, but the resistance reflected deeper tensions between traditional religious authority and imported technology that would define Ottoman decline. 30. The chief black eunuch, called the Kizlar Agassi, held one of the most powerful positions in the entire Ottoman Empire, and he held it precisely because of what he could not do. Eunuchs guarded the harem and controlled physical access to the sultan's private quarters. The chief black eunuch managed the entire harem system, controlled enormous budgets, influenced appointments, and essentially decided who could reach the sultan and when. Because he could never have political heirs or dynastic ambitions, he was trusted with proximity that no intact man could achieve. Some chief black eunuchs became kingmakers, manipulating successions and destroying careers. The most intimate form of power in the empire belonged to men chosen specifically for their inability to reproduce. 31. The Ottoman military was enormous, and it had a naming problem. Certain names like Mehmed and Ali were so overwhelmingly common that official rosters became useless. Thousands of soldiers shared identical names with no family surnames to distinguish them. Military administrators solved this through a system of descriptive nicknames based on physical features, birthplaces, or personality traits. Lame Mehmed served alongside One-Eyed Ali, and Mehmed from Konya, and Big Ali, and hundreds of variations. Roll call was essentially a comedy routine of distinguishing characteristics. This nickname system became so standard that many families eventually adopted these descriptors as permanent surnames during later Ottoman reforms. Your great-grandfather's limp is now your legal family name. 32. The Ottoman tax collection system was essentially government-sponsored extortion through a process called tax farming. The state would estimate how much revenue a region should produce and then auction off the right to collect those taxes to private bidders. Whoever paid the most upfront got the collection rights. These tax farmers then extracted as much as possible from the population, keeping everything above what they paid the government. The result was predictable. Peasants were squeezed mercilessly by collectors who had every incentive to maximize extraction and no accountability for the destruction they caused. Entire regions were depopulated as farmers fled impossible tax burdens. The state got quick cash while private contractors devastated the tax base. Short-term thinking at imperial scale. 33. For its final century, the Ottoman Empire was widely called the sick man of Europe, and the patient was definitely terminal. The treasury was empty. Debts to European banks were unpayable. Military defeats piled up. Territories broke away constantly. And yet, the last sultans kept building. Dolmabahce Palace cost 5 million Ottoman gold pounds, financed entirely through loans the empire could never repay. Abdul Hamid the Second built Yildiz Palace complex while defaulting on national debts. It was like maxing out credit cards to renovate your house while the bank is foreclosing. European creditors eventually took direct control of Ottoman finances, and still the palaces kept expanding. When your empire is collapsing, apparently the correct response is fancier architecture funded by the people watching you collapse. 6 centuries of power, and somehow the empire survived sultans who threw gold at fish, banned the word nose, and executed people for coffee. Here is what I genuinely want to know. Which Ottoman sultan would survive longest in the modern world, and which one would get arrested within the first 24 hours? Ibrahim the Mad at a pet store? Murad the Fourth at a Starbucks? Give me your predictions. Subscribe if this was the weirdest history lesson you have had all week, and drop a like for the Janissaries and their soup-based democracy.